There is a precise moment when a life, once clear and navigable, becomes utterly broken, a moment when a breath held too long turns to a gasp of smoke and ash, leaving nothing behind but the urgent need to simply vanish. For Miss Nora Kent, that moment was not marked by a grand theatrical tragedy, but by the quiet, devastating realization that justice, for some, was merely a convenient lie dressed in the robes of law. It was this devastating truth that led her to the massive, forbidding doors of Beaumont House, ready to assume the guise of a perfectly competent, perfectly unremarkable secretarial assistant. The desperation of a woman with a ruined past is a peculiar kind of armor. It sharpens the mind and freezes the heart, allowing her to perform the most meticulous of duties while guarding the most catastrophic of secrets. Nora had applied under an assumed name, offering references from distant, unimpeachable sources, her plain, unfashionable gown and tightly pinned hair screaming only efficiency, a deliberate camouflage against the eyes of a world determined to judge her. She needed to be invisible. She needed to be safe. Beaumont House, a labyrinth of oak-paneled walls and shadowed, echoing halls, the very embodiment of the old-world establishment she distrusted, was ironically the safest hiding place she could conceive. Before we step further into the velvet-draped, secret-laden world of Beaumont House, tell me, where are you listening from, and what historical era do you find most irresistible? Subscribe, like, and share your thoughts below. Part 1. New Hire, Old Scars. The interview itself had been a coolly professional affair conducted by an aging, severe housekeeper, but the final approval, the ceremonial handing over of the keys to the cramped, high-windowed office, was to be administered by the master of the house himself, Mr. Alistair Beaumont. Nora waited in the library, a room heavy with the scent of aged leather and wealth, tracing the spine of a massive, unread volume. She imagined Mr. Beaumont as a dry, precise man, a pillar of society, preoccupied only with ledgers and appointments. She was utterly unprepared for the man who entered. Alistair Beaumont was not dry. He was a force. A man in the prime of his years, built with an imposing frame that spoke of country riding and a life lived with unwavering purpose. His tailored coat was the color of midnight, and his profile, as he crossed the room, was sharp, intelligent, and distinctly powerful. He moved with the quiet assurance of a man who commanded respect without ever needing to demand it. Nora, rising to offer a curtsy, managed to say, "Mr. Beaumont, I am Miss Nora Kent, here to—" He stopped dead halfway across the Persian rug. The effect was immediate, absolute, and profoundly disturbing. His jaw locked, and the striking blue of his eyes that had swept over her with a cool assessment a second before, now narrowed and froze. It was the look of a man who had been struck not by a blow, but a memory so sudden and agonizing that it threatened to shatter the veneer of his composure. He did not see Nora Kent, the secretary. He saw something else entirely, something horrifying. Nora's practiced calm, the careful indifference she had cultivated for months, cracked. Her breath hitched, the blood drained from her face, leaving her chilled to the bone. This man, he knew. She remembered him now, too, a man on the periphery of that terrible, screaming night, a quiet, grim observer in the chaos. Alistair Beaumont took one slow, deliberate step closer. The air in the room thickened, becoming charged with an unspoken, terrifying recognition. He did not speak of appointments or salary or the arrangement of his papers. His voice, when it came, was a low, dangerous rumble, not an inquiry, but an inescapable demand, steeped in the bitter sediment of an old, lingering injustice. "Why did you run?" he asked, his eyes holding hers with the inescapable gravity of an accusation. Nora's lips parted, but no sound would pass. She could invent a lie, a dozen perhaps, but the truth, raw and ugly, was shimmering between them like heat on a summer road. To speak was to invite ruin. To speak was to break the seal on the past she had risked everything to bury. She had planned for this moment, had rehearsed 1,000 deflections, yet now, faced with his intense, knowing gaze, all she could offer was the eloquent, agonizing weight of silence. It was the silence of a desperate woman. It was the silence of guilt, or perhaps the profound silence of a truth too dangerous to voice. Alistair Beaumont merely studied her, his expression inscrutable, his accusation hanging unanswered in the oppressive quiet of the library. Her refusal to speak was in itself a definitive answer and a challenge. He straightened, the tension in his shoulders tightening to an unnerving degree. He was holding himself back, from what Nora could not be sure: fury or something deeper and more dangerous. He did not dismiss her. He did not call the housekeeper. He only turned, retrieved a small brass key from his desk, and laid it upon the blotting paper. "The office is the third door on the right, down the west hall," he stated, his voice now regaining its cool, formal register, yet underscored by a sharp, flinty edge. "Your duties commence on the morrow at 8. I have a long memory, Miss Kent. Do not give me calls to use it." Nora, her hands trembling imperceptibly beneath her gloves, picked up the key. She had secured the position, but she had lost her disguise. Her duty now was not merely to organize his correspondence, but to navigate the perilous proximity of a man who held the key to her shattered former life, a man who saw not the plain secretary, but the ghost of a terrible, long-remembered crime. Part 2. Paper Trails and Revelations. The first weeks at Beaumont House were a silent, psychological skirmish. Nora performed her duties with a meticulous, almost desperate perfection. She alphabetized, she cross-referenced, she organized the chaos of years into neat, logical columns. She was efficiency personified, a human barrier built of diligence and starched cotton. Alistair Beaumont, for his part, maintained a chilling, guarded distance. He watched her, not constantly, not overtly, but she felt the weight of his scrutiny in every quiet hall, in every brief, charged exchange across the mahogany desk. It was the look of a prosecutor studying a key piece of evidence, searching for the fatal flaw. Yet duty demanded proximity. She had to take dictation, manage his appointments with merchants and peers, and, most critically, organize the extensive, sprawling archives of the Beaumont estate, a task requiring her to delve into dusty boxes of old correspondences, ledgers, and family records dating back decades. It was in the gloom of the archived records room, among papers smelling faintly of mildew and forgotten ambition, that Nora found the first anomaly. She was cataloguing a box of legal documents pertaining to an estate sale that had occurred concurrently with the incident that had shattered her life. The file was thin, labeled only the Ashworth matter, and filed suspiciously out of sequence. As she read, her fingers, stained with the ink of ages, began to tremble.
The official police report, the one that had ruined her family, spoke of a clear crime, theft and disappearance. But the correspondence she now held, a series of hurried coded letters between the supposed victim and his solicitor, painted a startlingly different portrait. The victim, a distant cousin of the Beaumonts, had not been robbed. He had been liquidating assets, arranging for offshore accounts, and providing detailed instructions for his final, permanent disappearance. The crime had been staged. The victim had chosen to vanish. The revelation was a searing balm to Nora's soul. Her family had been framed, but the evidence was here, in the cold, unfeeling prose of a legal transaction. She worked late into the night, compiling her notes, a feverish energy consuming her until the weak gaslight began to gutter. It was Alistair who found her. He entered the office, startling her. He rarely worked past the dinner hour. He stopped by the desk, his gaze sweeping over the sheaves of historical documents she had spread out. "Miss Kent," he said, the formality still thick between them, "you exceed your hours." "I apologize, sir," she murmured, gathering the sensitive documents into a tight pile. The Ashworth matter required deep investigation. He raised a single, skeptical eyebrow, then leaned against the doorframe, his towering silhouette nearly blotting out the gaslight in the hall. "The Ashworth matter is ancient history. Why the sudden diligence?"
Nora, risking everything, met his gaze. The time for silence was over. "Because, Mr. Beaumont, I believe it is connected to the very event you remember me from. I believe the disappearance was a fabrication. I believe a crime was staged, and innocents were made to pay the price." His facade cracked. The cold prosecutor vanished, replaced by a keen, focused intensity. He walked over to the desk, not bothering to ask permission, and began to read the highlighted sections of the solicitor's letters. He was not merely judging her past now, he was processing her intelligence. For the first time since their first terrible meeting, they were allies, bound by the pursuit of truth. From that night forward, their professional partnership began to grow charged. The old office became a clandestine research den. They worked side by side, late into the night, fueled by strong tea and a shared silent tension. Alistair brought his knowledge of society and law. Nora brought her intimate, desperate knowledge of the case's official errors. She saw the astute, logical mind beneath his controlled exterior and the fierce sense of justice that governed his world. He, in turn, watched the true Nora emerge, a woman of acute intellect, iron will, and a deep, wounded capacity for fairness. The emotional walls Nora had built began to crumble under the sustained intensity of their work. They spoke in clipped, professional terms about the documents, but their glances lingered, a flash of approval from him, a spark of gratitude from her. She found herself noticing the way his tie was inevitably loosened after hours of focused work, the deep, resonant quality of his voice when he read an important passage aloud. Alistair, too, found the quiet competence of Miss Kent dangerously attractive. The woman he remembered from the crime scene was a cipher. This woman was alive, brilliant, and fighting for her honor. One night, while attempting to decipher a particularly ornate script, their hands brushed over an ancient letter. The contact was brief, a fleeting, accidental moment, but the sudden shock of warmth between them was electric, causing them both to recoil slightly, the charged atmosphere in the room now almost suffocating.
The realization was undeniable. Their professional need was rapidly transforming into something much deeper, something perilously close to vulnerability and yearning. Their investigation narrowed. The key to the staging of the crime, they realized, lay in who stood to gain most from the cousin's disappearance, who had actively suppressed the contradictory correspondence that Nora had found. Alistair, utilizing his family's connections, accessed a sealed registry of land transactions tied to the Ashworth estate. He brought the final, crucial ledger back to the office, placing it upon Nora's desk. Nora, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs, flipped to the final pages, following the paper trail of the funds that were intended to establish the victim's new, hidden life. The funds had never left the country. They had been intercepted, siphoned. A single name was written as the beneficiary of the final illicit transaction. The man who had framed Nora's family. The man who had ensured the false narrative was etched into history. The man who had profited immensely from the staged crime. Nora looked up at Alistair, her eyes wide with shock and a terrible sense of betrayal. Recognizing the script in the margin, it was a familiar hand, a familiar signature confirming the transfer. The final file named the culprit, Mr. Julian Thorne. Julian Thorne, Alistair's closest, oldest friend. The man who stood as godfather to Alistair's nephew. The man who had dined at Beaumont House only last week, sharing brandy and laughter. Alistair Beaumont took the ledger from Nora's frozen hand, his face draining of color as he read the conclusive, damning evidence. He looked from the signature to Nora, the horror in his eyes mirroring the devastation in hers. The professional partnership had led them to a precipice. Nora had found the truth that would save her name, but that truth demanded Alistair's sacrifice the loyalty of a lifetime. The revelation was absolute, and the choice, loyalty or justice, was now starkly and agonizingly laid at Alistair Beaumont's feet. Part 3. Choosing Forgiveness. The ledger lay between them like a drawn sword. The truth, stark and brutal, had severed the comfortable life Alistair Beaumont had known. Julian Thorne. The name reverberated with 2 decades of shared history, trust, and unquestioning loyalty. Nora Kent watched him, her own pain momentarily eclipsed by the heavy burden of his decision. She had known the price of her vindication might be high, but she had never anticipated it would demand the destruction of Alistair's oldest friendship. Her silence this time was not born of secrecy, but of profound respect. She would not beg or pressure him. Justice, if it came, had to be his free, uncompromised choice. Alistair did not speak for what felt like an eternity. He walked to the cold marble fireplace, leaning his head against the mantelpiece, as if steadying himself against an invisible blow. The man who had been defined by his rigid adherence to honor found himself in a moral crucible. Loyalty to a proven scoundrel versus justice for a woman he was rapidly falling in love with. The memory of the crime scene returned to him, the chaos, the ruin, the despair etched on Nora's young face as the world judged her. He remembered the quiet competence and fierce intelligence she had displayed over the last weeks, fighting for a truth that had been cruelly hidden. Julian's actions were not merely a theft, they were a systemic destruction of an innocent life for personal gain. To shield Julian was to become complicit in that sin. He turned, his eyes fixed on Nora, and in that moment the choice was made. The past, The friendship, the easy comfort of his society, all of it paled beside the absolute necessity of truth. "I will not sacrifice justice for comfort, Miss Kent," Alistair said, his voice low, firm, and irrevocably changed. "Julian Thorne made his choice when he framed your family. I will make mine now." He chose her. The plan was swift, meticulous, and born of their combined intelligence. They could not merely accuse Julian. They needed to present the evidence in a forum where Thorne could not escape through social leverage or legal maneuvering.
Alistair arranged a small, intimate dinner party at Beaumont House, inviting Julian Thorne and the solicitor who had handled the original Ashworth matter, a man Alistair had privately cornered and convinced to cooperate with the mounting evidence. Nora, though not expected to join the company, remained hidden in Alistair's private study, ready to provide the full file of forged correspondence when the moment was ripe. The dinner began with chilling civility. Alistair discussed business, and Julian, smug and oblivious, offered polite platitudes. Then, Alistair introduced the topic of the old Ashworth matter, mentioning Nora's tireless work in organizing the estate archives. "It seems, Julian," Alistair stated, pouring brandy with an unnervingly steady hand, "that Miss Kent has a remarkable eye for detail. She found documents proving that our poor cousin Ashworth was not robbed, but staged his departure. A fascinating discovery, wouldn't you agree?" Julian's composure wavered only for a fraction of a second, a tightening around his eyes, before he smoothly dismissed it as nonsense. "A fanciful theory by an overly zealous secretary, I presume, Alistair. Let the dead rest." "Ah, but the dead were kind enough to leave a paper trail," Alistair countered, his voice losing its veneer of politeness. He signaled the housekeeper, who brought a discreet note to the study door. Nora, her heart pounding, entered the dining room, carrying the damning ledger and the folder of coded letters. She did not look at Julian. She walked straight to Alistair and placed the documents on the table with a quiet dignity that was more devastating than any shout.
"Mr. Thorne," Nora said, her voice clear and strong, despite the years of suffering, "the true victim wished to disappear. You merely capitalized on his vanishing to conceal your embezzlement and frame my family. This ledger shows the intercepted funds. This signature, copied from your bank documents, confirms the final transaction." The confrontation was brutal and swift. Julian Thorne, cornered by the irrefutable evidence of the ledger and betrayed by his oldest friend, lost all restraint. He lunged at Nora, roaring an incoherent denial, but Alistair, anticipating the reaction, physically restrained him. The solicitor quickly stepped forward, securing the documents and confirming the validity of the evidence. The scandal that followed rocked the London social scene, but the facts were unassailable. Nora Kent's name was publicly, unequivocally cleared. The true criminal, Julian Thorne, was exposed and prosecuted. The shadow that had darkened Nora's life was finally, devastatingly lifted. In the weeks that followed, the dust settled. Nora was no longer merely Alistair's secretary. She was the vindicated woman who had helped him restore integrity to his own house and heart. The formal distance between them had completely vanished, replaced by a quiet, profound understanding forged in the fire of their investigation. One afternoon, Alistair found Nora in the office, preparing to resign. She had her honor back, and now she felt it was time to move on and build a new life, free from the constraints of service. "You are packing your things, Miss Kent?" Alistair asked, leaning against the doorframe, his gaze softer than she had ever seen it. My duties here are complete, sir, Nora replied, managing a small, bittersweet smile. My name is clear. I must now find my own path. He walked towards her, closing the distance that had once felt vast, but now seemed impossibly small. He didn't speak of the past or the crime. He spoke only of the present and the future. Nora, he corrected gently, using her first name, a shattering intimacy. You came here to hide, but you stayed to fight. We uncovered the truth together. I know your strength, your wit, and your capacity for forgiveness, for you forgave me my initial judgment of you. He reached out, taking her hands, pulling the worn leather gloves free and holding her bare fingers in his warm grasp. The touch was both a promise and a question. You have cleared your name, but you have also undone my solitude, Alistair continued, his voice thick with emotion. I asked you once why you ran. Now I ask you to stay. Not as my employee, Miss Kent, for that would be an unbearable waste of the woman you are, but as my partner, in this house, in my life, and in every truth we discover together. Tears welled in Nora's eyes. This was not the fairy tale proposal she had never dared to dream of, but a request built on fire and truth, a foundation infinitely more durable than fancy. He saw her, the whole of her, scars and all, and still asked her to remain. Yes, Alistair, she whispered, her voice catched with emotion. I will stay. He closed the final distance, pulling her into an embrace that was both protective and profoundly passionate. The cold, forbidding Beaumont House was suddenly warm, filled not with the ghosts of a ruined past, but with the breathtaking, absolute certainty of their future.